Welcome to a video series specifically made by, for, and with Beautiful Trouble, an activist from Myanmar working for justice, equity, and social change. Beautiful Trouble is all about people-powered creative tools for a more just world. We distill the lessons learned from our comrades from around the world to make them easily accessible for others so that they can make revolution irresistible too. Our books, study guide, toolbox, and strategy card deck, along with a global network of trainers, artists, activists, and organizers, all support more effective, innovative action. This is part 4 of our series, in which we'll be talking about a powerful strategic tool called Spectrum of Allies and Opponents. Other videos in this series cover action planning, creative action development, and more. Let's get started. First, we'll do a quick overview of the strategic planning process, and then we'll dive right into the tool. In other videos, we looked at the world of creative tactics. We often start there because that's what's cool, exciting, sexy. But the reality is that tactics are not likely to be effective unless there's some clear strategic thinking behind them. You can see in this example of a strategic planning pyramid that tactics are actually on the bottom, because there are often many of them, and because they need to be developed with an eye towards supporting the goals and the vision that are above them in order to deliver for your campaign. So in this video, we're going to look at one very powerful tool that can help us figure out how to reach the right people to win a campaign for change. The tool that we're going to start looking at is the Spectrum of Allies tool. And you can find it in your card deck. You can also find it in the toolbox under Spectrum of Allies methodology. The path is made by walking, as Antonio Machado said, but it's still helpful to have a good idea where your group is going, what sort of shoes you'll need, and how long the trip might take. That's where your strategic assessment comes in. Assessment and analysis, the process of gathering and then processing the information that your group needs to make good decisions, are really crucial steps in a good strategic plan. So if you go to the Spectrum of Allies chart, you'll notice that the superpower of this chart is to help you locate allies and opponents along a spectrum from active opposition to active allies in order to increase support for your own campaign, as well as shift support out from underneath the opponents. It's important to note, movements don't win by overpowering the opposition. We don't have enough time, money, people powered to do this. They win, or we win, by shifting support out from under it. So we use the Spectrum of Allies analysis to identify the social groups that are affected by our issue and to locate those groups on this spectrum so that we can figure out how to shift them over to our position. Identifying specific stakeholders, in other words, not just saying students, but students at public universities, not just workers, but possibly domestic workers in an urban setting, can help you identify the most effective ways of moving different social groups closer to your position in order to win your campaign. The more precisely you can identify stakeholders in impacted communities, the better you can prepare to persuade those groups or individuals to move closer to your position. You can then weigh the relative costs and benefits of focusing on these different blocks. So let's use a real-life scenario to help explain the Spectrum of Allies and work with it right now. Let's use the scenario where we have a vision for a world without violence and equality of genders. Let's make our specific campaign a campaign to stop gender-based violence. And in particular, let's have our goals be educating women on our legal rights and our legal recourses, and also to build male allyship to help men stand up to stop gender-based violence being done by other men onto women. So with that scenario in mind, let's use this tool to identify the groups that could be moved one pie slice along the spectrum, as well as to assess the relative cost of reaching, educating, or mobilizing each of these constituencies. We're not going to use this tool to identify our arch enemies and go after them. It's the people in the middle that we'll most often want to focus on. That's how we're going to win. Campaigns are won by shifting the middles over to passive allies, the passive allies over to active allies, and delegitimizing the opponents. The reason why we don't focus on the opponents other than identifying them is because we don't have enough time or money or energy to actually move them, except to move them usually to be undermined or potentially make them passive. So if we take a look using this example of stopping gender-based violence, what we might find, for example, are active allies are community groups that are working actively on promoting women's equality or LGBTQ access to healthcare. We might find our active opponents are those who are part of fundamentalist religions. We might find that our active opponents are big corporations who are interested in not paying fair wages to women, or who tolerate gender-based violence because of their interest in their corporate bottom line. Passive allies or passive opponents, these are people who either agree with us or disagree with us but are not doing anything. So we might find passive allies in women's groups that are progressive or liberal, but they don't exactly know what to do, or they're fearful of speaking out because of retribution. And these people might be in local community groups or church or mosque social action groups where they are working with others on other progressive issues, say housing, and they need just a little more support to become active allies in the gender-based violence fight. Now, it's very interesting always to look at neutrals and to identify who might be in the middle here. Some of the neutrals might be sort of friendly, some might be not friendly, but in the middle you might find in the gender-based violence world uneducated folks, or perhaps sheltered young women in rural areas who actually don't know that there are options to dealing with gender-based violence in the workforce, or don't know that they have legal recourse, or that the police are supposed to protect them. And perhaps there might be men in this region too who have wives and sisters and daughters and aunties and cousins who are women and girls, for example, or LGBTQ folks who are being harmed by gender-based violence, but they don't yet know what to do about it. So with a little bit of education or outreach, they could potentially be converted into passive allies or maybe even active allies. So take a moment now and hit pause, if you will, and think about what this pie chart might look like for one of the campaigns that you're working on. Now it's the time to get even more clarity and figure out how to prioritize or select groups to focus on for your campaigns. Let's fill out some of this. We're going to look at part 2 of our Spectrum of Allies chart, in where we take some of the people that we have, or constituents that we have noticed in the pie chart, and we list them in our part 2 chart down here. So you can see in the column, there's a column for the group or the person. There's a column to talk about where are they, where do you find them? Column for how they communicate, column for how they or who they might influence, and then there's a column to put your thoughts about how hard they are to reach and how worthwhile they are to your campaign, a cost-benefit analysis. So for example, if we are working on gender-based violence in our community, as our previous example, and we have noticed that there are young adult men who frequent a bar or a tea house, and we know where to reach, so we know where to reach them. And maybe they also go to a church or a mosque that is somewhat open-minded. Maybe they play football. We know also that they use cell phones, they text each other, they might use social media like TikTok or another online program, and potentially they could impact other men to join them in speaking out or trying to stop harassment. So we could fill out this chart for them. We could say the group is young men who play football and hang out in the local tea house. And then we know where they are. They're playing football in the evenings And they also are at a particular tea house. And we know how they communicate. They use text, they use social media, they use TikTok. And who do they influence? They could influence other young men who then could stop engaging in gender-based violence. And cost benefit? Well, it's pretty easy to reach them actually, because let's say we also use TikTok, or we also are young people and we know young men, and reaching people on social media is pretty easy to do for us. On the other hand, we could think about a group of people, older men, who we know they don't use cell phones or text. They don't go to the football field. They still might be part of the same open-minded religious institution, but we know that we'll need to talk to them in person. We'll need to go to the tea house or to their homes or to the mosque. And if our group, for example, is made up of younger men, it may be very easy to focus on reaching other younger men online and build a core group and then reach out to the elders. But we know that reaching out to the elders is going to be more difficult and take more of our time because we're going to have to do it in person. So this is how you take the Spectrum of Allies work, put it into a chart, and you can change the chart headings depending upon what your campaign is to figure out what your questions are. But this is how you then figure out what you can afford to do and what your strengths are in reaching different constituencies. So in closing, there are challenges with these tools. And in the particular, for the Spectrum of Allies and Opponents, the more specific you are in identifying your individuals or your groups that are on your Spectrum of Allies, that are either neutrals or passives or actives, will help you figure out where they are, what kind of communication they use, and how to reach them. So it's got to be very specific. And also remember, as you go through this chart, if you can't answer a question or you're not sure about it, do some research. You can come back to it with better information. And when you have better, more accurate information on the spectrum, the work that you do will be focused more effectively. So I hope you enjoyed our quick overview of a powerful tool, the Spectrum of Allies and Opponents. If you are looking for more methodologies that will help you do better strategic planning, please see the beautiful Action Trainers modules, or BATMO for short, especially modules 2, 3, and 4. Thanks for watching. We hope this video will help to inspire and facilitate the change you want to see in the world. This was part 4 of our series. The next video in this series is another powerful tool called SWOT to help you move from assessment to analysis and campaign development. As always, for more resources and to connect with fellow activists and share your stories, please visit our web pages and get in touch with the team at Beautiful Trouble.